We pulled the hydraulic cylinder out, we only did one valve at a time. We sent the hydraulic cylinder away to be casted, and redone, like a new one made. And then we turned the release back on in between. It took a few weeks to get the new hydraulic cylinder back, but when we got the new hydraulic cylinder back, we shut the release works back down, had to drain it again, installed the new one, tested it, it worked just fine, turned the release back on. So then we had to repeat that in order to fix the second hydraulic cylinder. We made sure that the shutdowns were coordinated with DEC, and that we did them either in conjunction with a spill event or with a rain event, to ensure that there was still flow going into the river while we shut down the release works. We also we had to exercise the gate towers as part of that. So we were also able to knock out our annual emergency gate tower exercise at the same time. That's an annual DEC dam safety requirement that we have to exercise those gates, and that's what shuts the release off. So we were able to check that off during the actual maintenance portion of it. So those lines are up, they're fully running, no issues with the new hydraulic cylinders that got put in, they're good to go. At Neversink, we wanted to insert a camera into the release works to check out the valve there to perhaps support some future valve work at Neversink. However, the first time we shut down the release to try to insert the camera broke. So we had to pull it out, and then we waited until we could get a new camera, and Neversink was spilling again to be able to shut down, and we were able to complete that camera route. So we put out social media posts, and we coordinated with National Park Service, Friends of the Upper Delaware River, and a couple other organizations to make sure that the message got out, especially once fishing season started, so that people knew when we were making release changes. And we made sure that all the release changes were done like 9 p.m. or later, so that there wasn't anybody in the river while we were making big changes. We held off on doing it. So just a quick update, so everybody's aware. Some of the other things that we've got going on besides this. I know you have heard about this project several times. This is changing. Several times. Again, this is the largest and most complex repair project in the history of the water supply. There are so many moving parts and pieces that have to all align to be able to get this done, to be able to get it done right, and to be able to get it done safely. With that said, it's very slow. It's a little laggy. Okay, so just a reminder of where the leaks are. So the minor one is here in Wawarsing. When we shut down the Delaware Aqueduct, again, that one's going to be able to be fixed just with grouting inside of the aqueduct. And then the major leak is here in the Rosing area, just outside of Newburgh. And again, the solution to fix this leaking portion of the aqueduct was to build the new 2.5 mile bypass tunnel. So again, this portion of it is done. The 2.5 mile tunnel itself is done. What needs to be done still is this last portion here, these final connections from the shafts to connect the new tunnel to the existing tunnel. And to do that, we have to shut down the Delaware Aqueduct, we have to depressurize it, we have to drain it, and then it'll take about somewhere between 5 to 8 months is what we're projecting to be able to make that final connection. We can't hear you.
How long is the final connection roughly? Not much.
This one is smaller. I don't know what it is. This one is, but because this one has to fill out a little bit more. It has the drainage tunnel and then the final connection. That's gonna take us, that side's gonna take us a little bit.
Is the boring machine still down there?
No, it's out of this, the big one.
Does it have to be reinserted to finish it?
You know, I'm not sure if they're using the big one because of the turn in here. So, but I do believe they're gonna do one side and then, you know.
Turning up the volume.
Also trying to get this to. Okay. So last time I came, we talked about the go, no go decision-making process. I won't go through all of that again, but again, just a reminder that there are several criteria that need to be met for us in order to go forward. You know, the right hydrologic condition to exist in KP, we're not gonna do this if we're in a drought condition. You know, we are looking at the other parts of the infrastructure, and a couple of other things, you know, in the world of construction to make sure that we are ready to go. So a lot of work went into getting to today. There was a full environmental assessment. I know I've made this link available before. The operations for the shutdown, I mean, that chapter of the EIS alone is 429 pages. You are more than welcome to read through it. But we'll try to boil down the operation a little bit so that it's more digestible and understandable. So normally the Delaware Aqueduct supplies about 50% of New York City's drinking water. So that's very difficult to manage for a 5 to 8 month period when you're taking half the city's water supply out of service. So we're gonna make demand during that period by hitting the Catskill system hard and taking about 600 million gallons a day out of the Catskill system. We did a rehabilitation of the Catskill Aqueduct in advance of this so that we could make sure that we could get that full demand. A lot of biofilm buildup over time in the Catskill Aqueduct. We literally sent people in with squeegees to scrape off the inside of the biofilm to restore that capacity. So the Croton pump stations, so there are 2 pump stations in the Croton system that allow us to take water out of the Croton system and put it into the Delaware Aqueduct below West Branch Reservoir. So the portion of the aqueduct that needs to be fixed is the portion between Rondout Reservoir and West Branch. So because there's a break in there with West Branch Reservoir, I can still use the Delaware Aqueduct below West Branch. So the section from West Branch to Kensico will still be in service during this period where we can take up to 240 million gallons a day from the Croton system to pump it down into Kensico. And then the Croton filtration plant that's up and running, we can get a maximum of 290 million gallons a day out of there. Construction timeline, I know you all have seen this slide, but just to hit it again real quick. Pre-shutdown operations are scheduled to begin June 1st. We are a month away from that at this point. In July is when we expect our contractors to start mobilizing to bring all the equipment back on site, to get everything ready to be fully ready to go on October 1st, when we shut down the Delaware Aqueduct up until West Branch and we depressurize it and start draining it at that point. And then that'll take us a few weeks to do. And then once we get all of that out of there, the workers will then be able to enter, the existing aqueduct and will not. There won't be any water behind the existing aqueduct when we drill into it. So we expect construction to last, between October and the end of May. If we finish before the end of May, we're not just gonna keep the aqueduct off. I mean, we will restore, the flow as soon as we're able to. We will, however, again, this is such a large and complex project. If something does happen or does go not according to schedule, and we don't think we're gonna finish by June 1, we will get the aqueduct back to a point where we can turn it back on. Either way, we expect the Delaware Aqueduct to be back up and running by June 1st of 2025. And then after the shutdown is complete, we're gonna work to rebalance our system. So during the shutdown, this is not normal operations for us. This is very, a very different way of operating than what we're used to. The way we normally operate the system is that we look across all the systems and we try to draw down the reservoirs in tandem so that come June 1st, which is the start of our water year, all the reservoirs have the same chance of being full. Now, they're all different shapes and sizes, and with different size watersheds, so they refill at different rates, and we take that all into account. But the goal is to draw them down normally so that they all have the same chance of refilling by June 1st. However, this year, what we're gonna do is we're gonna start by drawing down the Delaware system and creating a larger void than normal. So we'll still be operating in accordance with the flexible flow management program. I mean, the maximum releases in FFMP are really what the reservoirs can release out of their release source. You couldn't go any higher than those 4G release rates anyway. So for the releases, you're not gonna see massive differences in releases. Except, we anticipate being at that 4G rate, which does change throughout the season, while we're getting to October 1st. The reason for bringing this down is for a couple of different reasons. To create that void, since we're not gonna be diverting water, for that 5 to 8 month period, we're gonna be taking it in advance. The model takes the shutdown into consideration and will help us figure out what level we should be getting the reservoir down to. It also will allow us to capture that spring. It's been rain the last few years. We really haven't had that much snow. So capturing the spring rain that comes in, because once the shutdown is over, we're really gonna have to rely on that Delaware water to be able to bring the system back in balance. So we will be also preserving the water in the Catskill and the Croton systems. We'll still be maintaining our storage objective in the Shokan, but at the same time, we need the Croton system as full as possible, since we're gonna be relying on that much more heavily than we have in the past by taking the Delaware Aqueduct out of service. So during the shutdown, we do expect the Delaware system to refill just like it is now, during this time of the year. And, we're really gonna put a hurting on the Catskill and the Croton systems. So again, to make that balance after, to allow Croton and Catskill to refill, we'll be relying heavily on the Delaware after. So this is the same set of graphs that I presented last year. They're updated, but this way you're used to seeing this key, but I am gonna go through it again just to remind you of what it is that we're looking at here. So when we model in planning mode, we use the historical record. So there are 63 years in the model of which we're modeling. I'm only showing the averages because when I look at these graphs, when we're doing operations, there's 63 lines on here. And it's really hard if you don't know what you're looking at to digest that and understand it. It makes it really confusing. So we put the averages on here. So this line here, this yellow line here, is the average operations that we would expect under normal conditions. So this is the storage in the reservoirs. So imagine that the shutdown was not happening. This is what this yellow line is what we could expect to happen under normal conditions. This blue line is what we're modeling the shutdown. This is what we're getting as output for the shutdown. Again, using that 63 year period of historical record. This is under normal conditions. This shaded background here, this yellow shaded background, is the range, the operating range that we've seen over the last 63 year period. So you'll notice in almost all of the graphs that I'm going to show you tonight is that we will not be operating outside of that 63 year period with the exception of Ryan.
With the
So-
exception of what?
Run out reservoir. And I'll show you the graph and I'll explain that. So depending on hydrologic conditions, I mean, you've said it before, nobody has the predictive capability to say what the release is gonna be, on say December 12th, 2024. That kind of skill just does not exist anywhere in the universe. I wish we had it, but we don't. So when we are going into the shutdown, the operations decisions will be made in real time based on the best information that we have available.
Shannon, if that was not leaking, do we have any idea what that line would have looked like?
If it wasn't, if the.
If the leak hadn't been there, that average, would it have changed much?
No,
Okay, thank you.
when you look at the overall, the number,
Mhm.
like the amount of water that's in these reservoirs, the leak. I know it sounds like a lot, it's
But
really
it's-
a drop in the bucket
It's a
compared to the
huge
rest.
waters, yeah, okay,
Yes.
thank you.
So depending on rainfall, we're anticipating that we can get Cannonsville, Capacton, and Never Safe down, by 30% come October 1st. Now, depending on the hydrologic conditions, it might be a little bit more than that, it might be a little bit less than that, but we're anticipating 30%. And that's, double the current void, going into this. So the first two graphs are for Never Sink and Capacton. And this dotted line that goes down the graph here, that's October 1st, just so that you know that's the target period for the shutdown. So we're anticipating that under normal conditions, we could probably get Never Sink down to about 60% storage ahead of time. And that's by making the FFMP releases and through diversion. So normally, New York City is dynamic in what we take out of the Delaware reservoirs. We only take what we need. The Supreme Court decree authorizes us to take up to 800 million gallons a day out of the three reservoirs. We don't do that unless we have to. So we're hoping to manage this drawdown mostly through diversion. And taking that larger diversion ahead of time to protect the water in the Catskill and Croton systems. So we're anticipating again, Never Sink, it's about 60, maybe a little bit higher than that. It's kind of hard to look at on the graph. And the same for Capacton. But again, it's not outside the operating range that we have seen over the last 63 years. And it's pretty similar. We would draw Never Sink down a little bit earlier than we normally would going into the winter, and it's going to refill probably a little bit faster because Never Safe does have the smallest release works in the system. But again, our releases, those 4G release rates in FFMP are made based on season, so they change. And then compacted, again, very similar to how we would, to what you would normally see. So the goal is to kind of make it feel for you that you don't know that we are shut down. We are gonna be stressed out beyond food, but we're hoping for you don't know the difference.
What's the worst case scenario?
What do you mean? Like,
What could go wrong?
there's so many different things that could go wrong with a project of this size. I mean, that is part of the, EIS, looking at the environmental impacts. I mean, there's a whole risk analysis that's done, construction wise, there's a lot of risk analysis, that was done. So, I mean, I hesitate to answer that question because I don't want people to panic. That's my fear, is that, everybody thinks worst case scenario, but we have so many people, so many hands-on, everybody's watching it. Once this starts, there will be daily meetings every day to run through where we are, what's happening that day, who's responsible for what, where we stand in the timeline, and if something were to go wrong, what would happen? So that coordination will happen daily. It's not, we're meeting frequently now to go through things like this, but once the actual shutdown begins, that will happen. And if something does go wrong, it will get communicated. So looking at Cannonsville. Cannonsville, again, comes down, this goes down a little bit below 60%. And it does refill, by the start of June, or it comes pretty close to refilling by the start of June. Rondout is the one that comes out of that normal operating period, and there's a couple of reasons for that. So Rondout Reservoir has a very small watershed of its own, so it does not have a lot of inflow that normally comes into it. Whereas with one good rainstorm, we could see significant increases in some of the other reservoirs. You don't see that normally in Rondout. So there are 3 different tunnels that lead from one each from Cannonsville, Compacton, and Never Safe. And that water comes from those 3 reservoirs, and it feeds into Rondout, it mixes in Rondout. It goes through the reservoir and it enters the Delaware Aqueduct in Rondout. Rondout is also a terminal reservoir for us, so if something went wrong somewhere else in the system, we could take Rondout water and send it directly down to the city if we have to. So we tend to keep Rondout pretty steady, and pretty full, which is why, there's this line goes straight across. We won't be doing that when the Delaware Aqueduct is shut down. We're gonna be drawing Rondout down to about between 70 and 75% storage. So that's why that is out of that normal operating period for us. We also want to make sure it's a good void in Rondout. So Rondout does not have release works like Cannonsville, Compacton, and Never Safe do. We're talking a small conservation release. So that's seasonal. It's either 10 MGD or 15 MGD, which is very small compared to the other reservoirs. So with that changing, and only releasing, the community releases or the conservation release is going to stay on that 10 or 15 MGD depending on the season. But if we see a rainstorm or something, and we need to be able to evacuate water out of Rondout, Normally, we do that through diversion and send it down the Delaware, but we can't do that this time. So Rondout Reservoir got siphons. It is the only reservoir out of the Delaware system that got siphons because it only has the capacity to release 10 or 15 NGD, whereas the others have the capacity to release much more. And this was all looked at during the environmental impact statement, and it was determined through that work that the release works on the other 3 reservoirs were sufficient to maintain storage during the shutdown, but not for Rondout. And I also want to say that these siphons are temporary. When the shutdown is over, they will be removed from Rondout since we'll have the Aqueduct fully back in service. So they are temporary. Now, I didn't put the rest of the slides in here to show what happens at the other reservoirs throughout the system. They are at the back end of this slide deck, which I have sent in already. So if you're curious, they're there. There's also what I call the master slide deck on the DEP's website that has all the background slides, the ones that I showed in the past, but didn't show again today. So that is all on DEP's website. We do have a page specifically dedicated to the Delaware Aqueduct repair project. So all the information, the links to the EIS, these slides, they're all on there. If you want to go ahead and take a look on your own. So we do have a waterfowl management program. We are concerned about birds being on the reservoirs because they poop in the reservoir and we don't want that. So there is a program that we put in place where usually we use boats and noisemakers to scare the birds off the reservoirs. So this will actually be expanded a little bit more during the shutdown. So it'll be here, it'll be down at Kensico. So there's a couple different places where this program will be a little bit more active than it has in the past. I know recreation is also a big concern because we do allow recreation on and around the reservoirs. For the Delaware system, we do not anticipate doing anything with recreation. It should not be impacted. Permitted boating and fishing will still be allowed. No restrictions are going to be placed on the Delaware system. The only place we anticipate restrictions being put in place is on the Fulton system, because those reservoirs, if we get ice, are actually very popular for ice fishing. So people go down there and they do ice fish, but since we're going to be lowering the reservoirs a lot more than we have in the past, we don't want people out on the ice, because if there's a layer of ice, could be a trick layer of ice, and the water could actually be 4 or 5 feet underneath that ice. So we just don't want anybody out on the ice during the shutdown. So we will be putting out notice to Westchester County that no ice fishing in the reservoirs during the shutdown. So I know you've all seen this slide before and you heard me say it. We've been at it for more than 20 years. A lot of predecessor projects like the Catskill Aqueduct repair, the connection to Tunnel 2, changing out the gap medium in Croton. There's so many predecessor projects that had to get done for us to even be able to get to this point of even considering to shut down the Delaware Aqueduct. And right now, all signs point to green. I know you've heard me say that before. But right now, we are anticipating shutting down on October 1st. I know that there are still things that have to all magically align for that to still happen. And that no-go call could be made anytime, ahead of October 1st, but right now we are green, and I hope we stay green, and and we can make it green. So are there any questions for me?
We'll take questions first from the board
Okay.
and then from the public, because we don't want to hold you here forever. And Alan, Aaron.
Has the DEP, did anything with their pumping stations on the Hudson in anticipation of
Yeah.
something going wrong?
So we've always had those pump stations in the Croton system, or do you mean the one on the Hudson River?
On the Hudson River?
On the Hudson River. So that pump station hasn't been used in, I don't know how long we got. I think before I was born, it was the last time we used it.
I think in the sixties it was used, they had drought,
Yeah,
I
and
believe.
it really only exists as part of our drought management plan. And for us to get approval to turn that thing on, it would have to be the mother of all droughts. Because the water in the Hudson River really needs to be filtered and treated, which if we're sending it down the Delaware Aqueduct, we wouldn't be able to do. Plus, that portion of the aqueduct is taken out of service for the pump station, specifically on the Hudson River.
In the sixties was a terrible drought, so you
Yes,
could be
It
right.
it was the drought of record for this
Right.
weekend. But, the two pump stations in the Croton system, one on Cross River Reservoir and one on Croton Falls, they have also always been part of our drought management plan, and we have used those in the past during times of drought. In anticipation of this project, they got a huge overhaul. So that we have the pumping capacity that we do now, so I don't know originally off the top of my head what the pumping capacity was. But it is higher now, and we are brand new, essentially brand new facilities, so that was done.
Anybody else on board? Thank you.
So all summer, the reservoir, all summer, the tunnel will be working on.
Yes,
They'll be taking water all summer.
yes, we'll be taking water all summer, probably more than we usually do, just to be able to draw them down, to create that larger building.
Anybody else on the board? Okay. Any of the public?
On the flip side of the drought, we talk about the worst case scenario question in relation to flood protection. Obviously, if we have a situation like we had in 2006, where we had a flood, how is your ability to take water out of the canyon, so to be packed in, compare when the aqueduct was shut down to when it isn't? In other words, your ability to divert as opposed to release. In other words, what are you gonna do if it rains a bunch after the aqueduct was shut down and you start approaching 100%? Now what?
So we'll be making discharge mitigation releases to be able to maintain that conditional seasonal storage objective that exists.
Yeah.
So that is, the goal is to stay below that line so that that additional flood protection still exists.
So you'll always maintain a void.
That's the goal, is to always maintain a void.
Okay.
But even like now, we have had a lot of rain, but the releases are high. I mean, right now, the seasonal storage objective doesn't exist. It's away for the season, but when it does come back into play, we do have provisions within the FFMP to release the water to get back down to that.
During the drawdown, is the water mostly go down the aqueduct? Or go into the west main branches?
So the releases are still gonna be made in accordance with the rates in the FFMP. So, I mean, they're based on storage and what we call forecast available water, so what we're taking out and what's coming in. It takes into account that we won't be taking water during the 5 to 3 month period. So we imagine that the table is gonna stay at that higher release rate.
I mean, this summer, when you're drawing them down, that much is drawn down. Going down the aqueduct or will you get into the rivers?
So to get the reservoirs down, we're mostly gonna be putting it down the aqueduct.
Okay.
So, but the rates that were required to hit, we will still be hitting.
Anybody else? Thank you. We always appreciate the information
Secondly,
and, you know, we give out the treasured UDC pin, which you already have. So instead, we would like to present you with our Upper Delaware litter sweep. Sure. Now, we've had different, it's done in safety colors for our litter pickers along the highway. This year was the pink.